Okay, so let's get started. We've done the sound check, so we can begin. I'm also recording this webinar for reference in the future. So this is the Apply Online webinar part 2. And based on the first webinar, I did receive some comments and some suggestions. So I'll actually incorporate them into this webinar. And people also asked about how to add drop-down custom fields, link filters to pages and questions, and set up events. So in addition to recommendations, we'll cover those items as well. And in this webinar, if you have any questions after the webinar, feel free to send comments, suggestions, questions to support@pcreducator.com, and we'll be happy to address them. So I'm just testing one other thing to make sure that my voice is clear and that that everybody can see the screen. So just give me 1 second and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And I'll go ahead and start with kind of tie the loose ends from last time. So we'll do a custom drop-down for attributes that you can add to your application. And then we'll do filters to questions and pages. And then we'll actually start with the teacher recommendations, and then we'll start with the events. So to create custom drop-down controls on your application. So last time we talked about how we can use attributes to create custom fields. So in this example, I'll actually do a custom field that is also a drop-down. So as an example, let's say that we wanted to, in our application, we wanted to ask what term someone is applying for. So whether they're applying for the fall term or the spring term, and how would we set that up? So I would go ahead and start off in Campus, and I would go to Maintenance, Inquiry Attributes. So I would go to Maintenance, Inquiry Attributes. And then as we talked about it last time, we can select the existing category or create a new one. I'll just go ahead and create a new category for now. So I'll call it Apply Online Webinar. And then once I have the category, I'll give it a description. And the description, I'll go ahead and call that, let's say that we can call it term applying for. So here, we can make it global or year specific. So we talked about that last time. I'll just make it year specific for now. And the drop downs comes from the lookups here. So lookups determine what options they'll see. So for now, I'm going to go ahead. The next step would be to actually create a lookup. So lookup will have the different options. So the way that you create a lookup is you go to Maintenance, and you go to Lookup Preferences. And here you'll see Add New Lookup. So in the description, you can give that like a name. So let's say I call it Term Applying For. And then in the rule, you would put in your first option. So I'm going to say like fall here and click Add. Actually, sorry. So let me remove this. So the first step would be we click a new type here. Once we click a new type here, we put in term applying for. And then here we can put in our first option. So I'll go ahead and say fall. And the rule will be the same thing as your description. So I'll call it fall here. Once I create it, next time I don't have to do a new type. I'll be able to select it. I would see term applying for here. So then the next one will be, I'll just put in spring. and and the description will also be spring this time. So it'll say term applying for is going to be my lookup, and then within that lookup, my description is going to be fall and spring. And if I did for some reason want to reorganize it, I can use these arrows to show spring first, or I can move it down and show fall first. So once you have your lookups created, you need to make sure you remember the name of the lookup, because you'll need that when you are actually creating your inquiry attribute setup. So the lookup that I created is called term applying for. So I'll go back to my inquiry attributes, and I'll go ahead and say apply online webinar, and here I can say term applying for. I'll make it year specific, and then here in the lookup, I can find that lookup type, so it's called term applying for here. Allow custom text would be used. Let's say that you give them a few options, but you also allow them to type in something that doesn't exist. So maybe if you were asking them what their language of birth is or something like that, you might give them several options, but if it doesn't exist, you may also ask them that they can type in. In that scenario, you could check off allow custom text, but otherwise, if you only want them to select from the list that you gave them, you do not need to check allow custom text. So I'll go ahead and click add attribute to create my attribute. And then let me go back to my application page here. And I'll go ahead and add the control here. So if I go to content like we looked at in the first webinar, I'll go to add control. I'll select the main container because the main one is this part here, which is highlighted. And then I go to updatable. And as we covered last time, we would use a wizard box. In the wizard box, because this is an inquiry attribute, because the attribute is linked to the actual inquiry or applicant record, we use the attributes inquiries table. And then here I will see all the different options that I had created. So I see term applying for here. And it'll automatically show me that it's a drop-down control. If the option I selected in campus was like date, or if it was text box, then I will see those specific types here. But in this example, it's a drop-down, so I click finish. And then I can give it a label, so I can say something like term applying for. If I wanted to make it required, so we talked about that last time, I can do that. If for some reason, let's say I had 5 options initially, but I wanted to make only 1 or 2 selectable, I could do like fall or spring, fall, spring. So this basically lets you put a condition or restrict your options. So if you had initially, you had created 10 options, but after a certain period, you only wanted to show 5, you can say use only selected values and check those. Or you can use all but selected, and the ones that you selected will not show. So I'm just going to leave it as this, use all but selected, and I won't select anything, so both options show up. And then I'll click save. And then I can move it up and down wherever I may want this control to show up. But now you can see that the term applying for shows up, and in the drop down, you can see that it has fall and spring. So I can move it somewhere towards the top, move it above the save button, and so forth. And that would be, so I've moved it here. Let me do view page. So now it's here in the middle where it says fall, spring. So that's how you create a custom drop-down fields using inquiry attributes. The next thing that someone had asked was about how do you restrict controls and pages so that they're only visible to certain groups of people. Let's say that you're asking some questions that are only applicable to upper school kids or only applicable to lower school kids, and you don't want those same questions to show up for someone else who's really not going to be required to fill them out. So for example, let's say that for whatever reason, there's this question called what program you're applying for. Let's say that I only wanted to show this question to lower school applicants. whereas my applicant that I have up is in 10th grade. So if I want to put a filter on the control, I go to properties of the control here. And I go to the property, and then in the filter, I pick the filter that I would have set up in Campus. So we have documentations on how filters work and how they're set up, but my goal here is just to show how to link filters, because I could do a separate webinar on just how filters work. So here I click the filter drop down, and then you look for the inquiries-based filters. So let's say that I have this one called Applicant LS for lower school, and I save it, and this is the control called what program you're applying for. Now when I click View Page, that control is hidden now, so I cannot see it anymore, what program you're applying for. Now if I go back and remove the filter, I should be able to see it again, because if I remove the filter, then it would be visible to everybody. So I'll go ahead and remove it now. And now it shows up what program are you applying for. So that's how you can show and hide certain controls. But now let's say instead of an individual question, I want to hide an entire page. Let's say for whatever reason, scholastic information should only be visible to lower school applicants. I go to the page, I click Content. On the right-hand side, there's a filter tab here. So the tab on the right applies to the entire page, whereas the tab or whereas the properties in individual control would just apply to that control. So I click Filter here. And then here it says Page, and I click the drop down and I find my inquiries-based filters. And then here I can select Applicant LS. And then if let's say I go to the Applicant Info page, and you'll notice that when I'm in the Edit view, I can see all the pages, but when I go to the normal view by clicking View Page, then I only see the pages that are applicable to my applicant, which is why Program A and B on the left doesn't show up for Kathy, because these two pages have some other filter on them. But right now we're concerned with the Scholastic Info page here. So when I click View Page, you can see that that page disappears because my applicant is in upper school and not lower school. Now, if I go back to that page and I click Filter and I remove it and click Save and go to another page and click View Page, then I would expect that the page shows up again. So that's how you link filters to controls and pages, so that you can make your application versatile, so that certain pages and certain questions are only applicable to certain groups of people. So now that I have covered kind of the questions that came up last time from the first webinar, let's go ahead and begin the teacher recommendations, which is the big part of this webinar, and then we'll try to cover the events portion. So to start off, I want to kind of walk you through the big picture. The first step is that the parent goes to the applicant profile page, which we looked at last time, and they request a recommendation from their teacher. So they'll see the recommendations that are applicable to them, and they click Request. Then they put in the teacher's name and their email address. So I'll just put in like Fahad Test, and I'll put in my email address. So then I click Submit. Now what happens is that when I click Request, I would get an email, or the teacher would get an email, so that he or she can see the where that page is going to, so where that recommendation is. So let me go ahead and pull up let me go ahead and go to the link that I received in my email, and then I'll also later show you where those emails are set up. So when the teacher receives the link in their email, it'll take them to a secure link that is specific to the applicant that requested that recommendation form. So I'm brought here to my recommendation form, and this would be what the teacher would see. And we'll be covering how you would set these questions up. So once the teacher gets the link, they would come here, they will see the student information, and then they can start submitting the request, completing the recommendation request. I'll just put some information in improvements. Okay. So actually, before I submit it, I want to show you what the applicant sees before this has been submitted. So what the applicant will see is that they have requested the recommendation here, and then under status update, they'll see that it has been scheduled, meaning that it has been requested, but it's not marked as submitted yet. So once I go back as a teacher and click submit, it takes me to the thank you page. Thank you for submitting. I also get an email thanking me as a teacher. So now let's see what happens here. So if I refresh, this time it says that it has been completed, and here it has been marked as submitted. So that's basically kind of the workflow. A parent requests a recommendation, an email goes to the teacher. The teacher clicks on a secure link. It takes them to the recommendation form. They submit it. They get a thank you email, and the applicant is marked with that they have submitted the recommendation. You'll notice that the applicant definitely won't see what that recommendation was. They'll just see whether it has been completed or not. But if you go to the campus side, so let me go to the campus side here. And as an administrator, you'll see that this person received the teacher recommendation action, and then there's a PDF here that the administrator can actually open and view what the recommendation said. So the parent just will know whether it has been submitted or not, whereas the administrator can see when it was submitted, who it was submitted by, so it's Fahad Test who submitted it, and what the recommendation contains. So that's kind of the overall workflow of how recommendations work. So now I want to get more into setting up the actual recommendations, what pages you have to look for, and so forth. So the one thing you have to, before you even start setting up your recommendations and so forth, you have to know where those emails come from. So there are two main emails that go out. One email goes out when the teacher or when the parent requests the recommendation. The email goes to the teacher. And then when the recommendation is submitted, a thank you email goes to the teacher. You can also send an email to the admissions team, or you can BCC them on the emails that go out to the teacher so that they're aware that recommendations have come in. The recommendations emails are set up under actions here. You click on actions. You can pick any action. It doesn't matter. It can be apply online or so forth. The goal is to get to the email merge screen so that you can actually set up the template. So I'll just pick one. I'll go to multi-action email merge. And this is where you can set up the templates. And the reason that we have them under actions is that you'll need action-specific fields because you'll need to know what the action description will be, like the name of the recommendation. We also have teacher email, teacher name if you want to, if you're going to say like dear teacher name, so that the teacher can see that it's addressed to them. So let me load up a sample recommendation request. So this is an example of one. So it says, dear action recommendation, teacher name, student is in the process, and so forth. And then this is the important part. It says, please click here to use our secure form. You have to make sure that this link is coming from, it uses this field here called action merge URL. So if you were to drop down this field, it'll look like this, but you can hyperlink it to like a word such as here or something like that. So like if I look at this here and go to properties, you can see that in the URL, I've put in that field action merge URL. This does, in the back end, this creates a secure link that makes sure that the teacher goes to the right recommendation. So you should never just manually put a link to a recommendation. You should always make sure to use action merge URL field. So this is where the recommendation request email is set up. This is the same place where the recommendation submitted, meaning the thank you email, is set up to the teacher. So it says, dear teacher name, student was, this recommendation was successfully submitted. Thank you for your help. So both emails are set up here. As we'll cover events later on, even the events email is set up here. In this example, it says that you have signed up for this event at this time. Thank you for attending and so forth. So all the recommendations and the event email is set up under actions here. The next thing that you would need to know before you set up the recommendation form is what we call inquiry action attributes. So in the first webinar, we went a lot over the inquiry attributes. Then we also have inquiry action attributes. Inquiry action attributes are currently only used for the purpose of recommendations. So you would only come to this screen, at least as of now, just when you're setting up recommendations. And the purpose of inquiry action attributes are to create custom fields that you'll be using in your recommendation. So the fields such as the student first name, last name, grade level, that'll come from your general inquiries table, but all the actual questions that you're asking will come from here. And these attributes are set up the same way that we covered last time, how the inquiry attributes are set up. So you create a category, and then you put in the description, and then you create the attributes. And then you would link these attributes to your questions when you create your actual recommendation form. So now let's actually cover the setup of your recommendation form. So first thing would be you would need to consider what questions you're going to ask people in the recommendation form. So like we have what kind of school someone attends, and then different drop-down questions that I had shown you earlier. And a lot of these drop-down questions will be set up with lookups, like having drop-downs that teachers can select from, which is what I have done with all of these here. So first you have to kind of figure out what questions you're going to ask them and set up those attributes first. Just like we did in the first webinar, the only difference is that instead of going into the inquiry attribute screen, you're going to be in the inquiry action attribute screen. So you go through that first. The next step is that you create an action. So you go to maintenance action setup, and you would create an action. You just have to make sure that that action category is set to inquiry recommendations. And then you can give it a name such as teacher recommendation or math recommendation or English recommendation. You need a separate action for each type of recommendation. So if you have one for each subject, you'd want to make sure that you create separate actions for each subject. In terms of read roles, you can check off maybe admissions full and applicant so that admissions team can view the recommendation letters, and applicants can kind of see it under the status update control here, whether they have come in or not. But either way, they're not going to see the actual PDF. So as an example, I've set up, also when you're setting up the action, you would want to make sure that at least your admissions division is checked off. So your school may call it like your school's name, or it may say your school's name plus the word admissions, but at least one division needs to be checked off. And we have documentation in detail on how to create actions. But the main thing is that you don't have to do status or substatus change. The main thing is that category should be inquiry recommendations. So let me show you an action that I created earlier. So I'll just select inquiry recommendation. So the one in our webinar we'll be working with is called teacher recommendation action. So I had created this one earlier. So after you create the action, you have to decide who can request recommendations. Do you want people to request recommendations when they begin the application or only after they have submitted the application? Or should certain recommendations only be done by upper school students or certain recommendations only be done by lower school students? So you kind of have to think about who's going to be able to actually request the recommendation. So you go to Maintenance Checklist Actions, and you pick the checklist that this action will apply to. So you can review the documentation on how checklist works, but the basic thing is that checklists are used to determine what kinds of things are required for each groups of applicants. So like if I select applicant LS checklist, they are required to submit an ERB. If I do applicant US, they have to sign up for parent interviews. They have to turn in PSAT. They have to do math recommendation. And then there's a general one. It's just called applicant. It would apply to anybody who submitted the application. So they would have to do teacher recommendation, do parent interview. They need to have application received action, and they need to do applicant interview. So basically, once you create the action, you have to link it to your checklist. The way that you link it is you come to Maintenance Checklist Actions. You pick your checklist, whichever group you want to make that recommendation applicable to. You select that, and you pick the action from the list here. And then you simply just click Add Action, and it'll move it down. That's how the system will know that teacher recommendation has to be completed for everybody, not just upper school or not just lower school students. So once you create the action, once you link it to the checklist, and you've also kind of created your attributes that you're going to be linked to your actual recommendation form, now you're kind of ready to get started on setting it up in the actual CMS portal. All right, so let's go over some of the main pages for the recommendations. One would be your control on your applicant profile page where they would actually request it from. The second one would be the actual page where they put in the first name, last name of the teacher. So let me actually go through some of those pages. So the first page, and the way that I'll do it is I'll go to my applicant that I'm testing with, and I'll delete this action so that I can go back to that page. All right, so let me refresh the screen. So because I deleted the action, now I can request it again. So the first page would be the applicant profile page. You'll need to have this control. The second page will be called the teacher recommendation request page. You can call it something different, but this is what we normally call it. This is a page where they'll actually request a recommendation from. Then the other pages will be your actual recommendation pages, like where the page that teacher goes to complete the form, and then the final page will be your thank you page. So once teacher completes the form, it would take her to a thank you page. I like to start from the back and then move towards the top, because if I start with the thank you page, when I'm doing the recommendation page, I'll need to connect the submit button to the thank you page. So I like to start towards the end, from the end, and then go to the pages where the parents will actually begin from. So if you don't know where your recommendation pages may be, you have some pages in your database, especially if we recently giving you the link to your apply online form. You can just go to pages and maybe search for the title contains the word recommendation or something similar. So I just do recommend and click search. So it brings me to my pages here. So I have the recommendation request page. I have the actual recommendation form that the teacher completes, and then recommendation successfully submitted is my thank you page. My applicant profile page, I already know where that is. So because it doesn't have the word recommendation in it, it doesn't show up. But this is the page we've already looked at earlier. So the first page I will start off is with the recommendation successfully submitted, which is my thank you page. So if I just open that up, it just says thank you for submitting the recommendation. It's a very simple, straightforward page. It just has the text control that we looked at last time, and you can put in whatever message you want. So this is a very easy page to set up. So that's the first page you can set up. The next page that you would set up is your actual recommendation form. So if you have math recommendation, English recommendation, science recommendation, you would set up those pages as their own separate forms. But if you just have one general recommendation form, then you would just need one recommendation. So in our example, we'll look at the teacher recommendation forms, as that's the one I've been testing with. So let me pull this up. So this is the recommendation form, and you might already have a basic version of it in your CMS portal that we had copied from. So you may just start off with this page and make changes to it the way that you would like. But this is a page that you would set up. Now let's look at what controls we have and how we set those controls up. But the idea is very similar to the first webinar and how you add controls to these pages. So as I mentioned earlier, the basic fields like the first name, phone number, email, these just come from the inquiries table, and you can see inquiries, inquiry first name, inquiries phone, inquiries email, and again they can be added through the updatable wizard box like we looked at in the first webinar. Then I also have some text controls that we talked about just to give them some instructions. So these are the attributes inquiry actions. So these are the attributes that I had created earlier, or I had shown you earlier on in Campus. But basically the way that you set these up is that you go to wizard box. In this, for all of your teacher recommendation attributes, you're always going to select attributes inquiry actions, because these will be linked to the questions of your recommendation. So I will select that, and this is where I can see all the attributes that I had created. So for example, if I wanted to, let's say that I wanted to ask for some sort of additional comments maybe, so I'll put additional comments here. And it tells me that it's a text box, meaning that it would be something that the teacher will have to type in. So I could click finish here. And then here I could have it say like multi-line with autosave if it's like an essay control, or if it's just a normal box where they would type in information, or like a normal question, I can just give it a label, additional comments, and I can click save. If I wanted, I could also check the required box, but this is basically how you would add such a control. If I had made it a multi-line, then it would look like this essay control here. And then the way that the drop-down would work is like this here. So if I open up this control, student is on time, you can see that it's connected to the table called attributes increase action, and is connected to is on time is the attribute. And this attribute, if I click save here, this attribute is connected to a lookup that we looked at initially, which has the options 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's how these options are coming from the lookup preferences, which are linked to your inquiry action attributes, which are connected to your question here. So this is really important to know how these things are connected. So they come from the lookup, then they link to the inquiry action attribute. Then the inquiry action attribute gets linked to the controls that you're using. So then you would just basically start adding your controls to this page. However, like whatever position they need to go to, you can start adding your text control that would have your instructions and so forth. So you would create the recommendation form page, and then the biggest difference between this page and all the other ones are this teacher submit recommendation control. And this control is found under admissions, and it's called teacher submit recommendation. So I just want to show you what properties it has. So if I open it up, so add email on submit, this is where you would link the email that we had looked at earlier. Recommendation submitted, this is where you would link it, and then you would click the add button, kind of like how we did an example in the first webinar. Then the other big thing is the thank you page location. So this is why I said I start from the end and then go towards the front, because if I already have my thank you page set up, I can link it. Then I don't have to create it and then come back to this page and then link it. So because I have my thank you page already set up, I can just link it here. Simple recommendation form. What that means is that if you do no, it's going to require you to basically set up a HTML form like the one we have right now, where the teacher can type in answers and select answers and so forth. Whereas if you were to make it a simple one, all that would allow the teacher to do is like upload a file. So if you were to give them a PDF file, they can download it, fill it out on paper, and then upload a PDF. That would be like a simple recommendation form. We're not going to cover that in this webinar, but if you did want to set that up, we have that in the documentation, or you can call the support line. So these are the basic properties, and then you just click save, and this page would be set up. The page before that is where the parent goes in and actually types in the teacher's name and their email, and then request the recommendation. So let me go to that page next. So this is that page here. The reason you've probably noticed it here too, it says like unable to find recommendation here, unable to request recommendation, is because I'm in an admin mode and not really, I'm not going through that secure link. That's why, and I don't have any like applicants selected right now. But when people have like applicants selected, if teachers are going through a secure link, they won't see this red message. So it's just I'm seeing it because I'm in the process of setting it up rather than actually completing it. So on this page, we also have just a text control for some instructions. But on this page, the important control is teacher request recommendation, which you can find under admissions, is called teacher request recommendation here. And then if I open this up, this is where you can link the recommendation request email that will go to the teacher. Then redirect on submit. I just send, so when they put in the teacher's name and click submit, I just send them to the applicant profile page so they can kind of see all their status and what recommendations they have requested and so forth. Now, this is the important part. The reason I set up my recommendation form first is because when I go to this control, I need to link it to that page. So initially, we created actions. So I had created this teacher recommendation action. I also had one called math teacher recommendation. If you set up those actions correctly, they'll show up here. And all you have to do is point each action to the right recommendation form. So I've pointed my math action to the math recommendation, and then I've pointed this teacher recommendation to the teacher recommendation form, which is this form that we were just looking at. That's why I set that up first before I came to this control. So this is all there's to in terms of this control. That's all you have to do. You can put in an email. You can link it to the recommendation form that you have already created. In terms of the setup, the longest the longest time is used to set up the actual form and adding controls and so forth. But other parts are really quick to set up. Okay, so before parents come to this page, they'll be in the applicant profile page that we were looking at earlier, which is this page here. And there's a teacher recommendation control here. So this control is found under Add Controls and is found under the Admissions Profile, and it's called Recommendation. So this is the control that shows up here. If you go to Properties of this control, the properties that you have to kind of look at is Allow Cancel, Allow Resubmit, Request Link, and then the title is just what shows up to the applicant here. Allow Cancel means that if they have already requested it, can they cancel that recommendation request? If you say yes, the applicant will be able to cancel it. The reason for this could be that if they have requested a recommendation from a teacher and the teacher hasn't submitted it in a few weeks or however, they can cancel it and cancel the recommendation. Allow Resubmit is that they can cancel it and so they can cancel the recommendation and then request it maybe from another teacher. Allow Resubmit is that they can resubmit or they can resend the request to the same teacher, so that if the teacher hasn't filled it out in a couple of weeks, maybe they can send them another request to let them know to fill it to complete the recommendation. So you can play with these properties and see which ones you may want to enable. And then this is the request link. So this is where you would link the page that we were just looking at, called the teacher recommendation request. That's how the system will know that when someone clicks the request button down here, it'll take them to the request page. And from that page, it'll send the teacher to the recommendations that are linked to those two actions. And from the recommendation page, the submit control will take them to the thank you page. So that's how this whole process is set up. And then, yeah, so this is basically all in terms of setting up the recommendation forms. This is basically it. You start with the thank you page, then you set up your actual recommendation, then you set up your request page, and then you link this control to your request page. And then after you're done with that, you'd want to go through and test it out, request a recommendation form, make sure the email goes to the teacher, make sure that the link that the teacher clicks on takes them to the right recommendation form, make sure when the teacher submits it, that action comes through campus, make sure they get a thank you email. But that's basically it in terms of the teacher recommendation form. And we also have documentation that explains this whole setup process. So now I have about 12 more minutes. I'll quickly cover the events, how events work. The way that the events work is somewhat similar to the recommendations, but it's a lot more simpler in terms of the different parts. The first step with the events is that you go to campus and you set up an action, just like how you did the recommendation action. The only difference is instead of using the inquiry recommendations category, you're just going to use the inquiry actions category. You can give it a name, just everything else will be very similar. So the one that I was testing with is called the student interview or student visit. This is the action that I've created. So the first step, you create the action. The next step is you link the action to the checklist, just like we did the recommendation. The purpose of that is that you may have certain events that might be applicable to just lower school or just upper school, or you might have some events that are applicable to everybody. So the checklist determines who can sign up for those events. Once you associate the event to your checklist, the next step is you go to maintenance, um, events, event categories, and you create a category of that event. So that could be the same name as your action. So if I click add new category, it'll bring it down here. I can click edit. The most important part of this is that um, if you want to close sign up number days before, what that means is that let's say that you have an event in 3 days and you don't want someone to sign up like within the last 3 days, or you don't want someone to sign up the day before. They should sign up for like a few days before or like a month before or so forth, so that once you have a list of your signups, you may not want to add more students to that event. So if you leave it blank, they can sign up until the day of the event. Whereas if you put in, let's say 2, they'll be able to sign up until 2 days before the actual event starts. So that's up to you. Comment visible when they're signing up, they can type in some sort of request or anything like that. If you check this off, they'll be able to do that. If you do not check it off, they won't be able to do that. Max attendees per family, how many people can, within one family, how many people can come for a specific event. And then this is the most important part. You're going to want to make sure that you link the category to the actual action that you created previously. So this is an example that I've done. And then here I have the instructions for the actual event. So this is an example. I created a category called student visit, one attendees per family. And then this is the action and these are the instructions. So that's what you would do. Once you have your category, then you go to maintenance and you go to events. You select your category from the top, so I'll do student visit. And then you use this here to create the different days and times. So you can put in a range of dates here, and then you can put in the begin end time. You can put in the length in minutes, and you can put in an interval. So between each spot, how many minutes before the next event begins, and then capacity per event. So this would be like if I have this one that happens in June from 10 to 11, only 2 people can attend. So when these 2 people sign up, then nobody else will be able to sign up for this date and time. So you would put in the information here and then click schedule, and it'll create all those events for you. If there are certain times and dates that you want to delete, simply just click delete and it'll remove them from applicants being able to sign up for those dates and times. So that's the part that's done in Campus. Then the front end part, if I go to the applicant profile page, for events, you have this events control on the applicant profile page. Then you have the place where they actually pick the day and time, and then you have the thank you page. So if I click, so the control here is called events, and you can find that under admissions profile is called events. And then if I click on the properties, and I would normally also do this from the back forward, like I would start with the thank you page and then the sign up page and then come here. Because we don't have a lot of time, I'll just go over each control from the beginning and kind of show you how to set each control up. So in this control, the main thing you have to know is the event location. So this link here will kind of take them to the page where they'll actually pick the day and time that they want to sign up for. So the page that we have is called the admissions event calendar. iCalSync is that when they sign up for events, they can link it to their Google Calendar so that it is visible in their Google Calendar or like Outlook Calendar. So for schedule now text is just the text that they see. So as you can see in the background here, it says signed up now. So this is where it's coming from, and then the title is just the title of this of the widget. So let me just save this here. And the reason that I can see the student visit and the parent interview is because my checklist that I fit under has these 2 actions included. So if I click sign up now, it takes me to that admissions event calendar page. In this page, so let me go to the next page and then I'll come back to this page. So this page has a calendar where you can view the instructions of the event, the description of the event, and you can click sign up. And it selects the date and time for you. So if I go back here, so if I select the 30th, it'll select that date. If I want, I can even switch it to another date here. Now, some schools, what they like to do is instead of taking them to the calendar, they like to link the control on the applicant profile page directly to this page here. And the parent can just select the day and time from here instead of going to the calendar page and then coming here to put in the attendees number. So it's up to the school. You can either bring them directly to this page and let them select the day and time, or you can send them first to the calendar page and have them select from the calendar, and then here they can maybe type in their comment or select their attendee number. So let me go back now. So this is the admissions events calendar, and if I go to content, the control that you would use is under admissions is called events calendar. And if I pull this control up, it's linked to the sign up link, which is the admissions event page that we just looked at right before this. So it'll take them to that page next. So, and then this is like first day of the week, last day of the week was the default view. This is very pretty self-explanatory what that would do. So I go ahead and click an event here. I click sign up. It takes me here. So this page is called admissions event. If I click content, the control on this page is called event sign up, which is found under admissions and is called the event sign up control. So you could have just send people directly to this page if you don't want them to send to the calendar page. And if you go to properties of this page, this is where you would link it to the thank you page. And this is where you would link your email template that we looked at towards the beginning, so that when they sign up, they get an email to let them know that you've signed up for this event at this day and time, and what the description of the event is and so forth can be done through the email template. So in terms of events, that's the basic setup. If you don't know where your event pages are located, just do what we did last time. You can go to your pages screen that we looked in the first webinar, and maybe just search for the word event, do like contains event, and they'll most likely be named like admissions event calendar, admissions event sign up, thank you, and so forth. The other ones are most likely going to be your development related events, like for people who sign up for fundraising events and so forth. So most likely you're going to be looking at your admissions events pages to figure out how to get to them. If you don't have them, you can also create them brand new and just put those controls that we talked about. That should be pretty straightforward. So that is all I had today. So to cover today. And then this webinar was recorded or is being recorded, so we'll post it to the help page soon. And then, yeah, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email support@pcreducator.com. And I'd like to thank you for joining the webinar. Hopefully this process is a bit more clear now. And yeah, if you have any follow-up questions, just reach out to us. And thank you again for joining us.